Have you ever lost everything? Absolutely everything? To the point where you look around and no longer recognize anything from the life you once had? This is the story of a woman who faced exactly that and discovered that when everything ends, God is just beginning. The story of Ruth and Boaz is not just a biblical romance. It is living proof that love born from pain can change the course of history. Today you will meet Ruth and Boaz, the love that rose from the ashes and changed the history of Israel. This is a biblical story that goes far beyond a simple romance. It's about redemption, faithfulness, divine providence, and how God uses the brokenhearted to fulfill his eternal purposes. And at the end of this video, I'll reveal something that will connect this love story with the plan of salvation that reaches you today. If you are going through a time of loss, feel invisible, or believe that your past disqualifies you from the future God has for you, this story will transform you. Because Ruth was a foreigner, a widow, and poor, and yet she entered the lineage of King David himself and of Jesus Christ. So take a deep breath, prepare your heart, and let's dive together into this journey where pain finds purpose and love restores what seemed impossible. Bethlehem, the house of bread. Ironically, it was precisely there that famine had arrived, a famine so severe that it forced an entire family to abandon their land, their roots, everything they knew. Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons left Israel and went to Moab, a land of idols, a land of foreigners, a land where the God of Israel was unknown. They went in search of survival, but they found tragedy. Elimelech died far from home, and as if that weren't enough, Naomi's 2 sons also died. In a few years, that woman who left Bethlehem full would return empty. 3 tombs remained, 3 widowed women remained, and among them a young Moabite woman named Ruth, married to one of Naomi's sons. Now think about this. What would you do if you lost everything? If the land you walked on was no longer yours, if the people you loved were no longer by your side, if even your name carried the weight of loss? Naomi faced exactly that. She had no inheritance, no children, no visible future. Only the bitterness of someone who survived when everyone else was gone. But here's the secret that many ignore. God doesn't write endings where we see periods. He uses commas. And in that desert of pain, something was about to bloom, something that no one, not even Naomi, could have imagined. Because just when you think it's all over, that's exactly when God begins to work. The news reached Moab. The famine in Bethlehem had passed. God had visited his people and given them bread again. For Naomi, this was a sign. Nothing remained to hold her in a foreign land. Her sons were dead. Her husband was dead. Only the memory of what once was remained, and the pain of what would never be again. So she made the decision. She would return to Bethlehem, alone, with nothing, only the weight of age and the mark of widowhood. Orpah and Ruth, her daughters-in-law, began the journey with her, but Naomi knew that this made no sense. Why would 2 young widows abandon their chances of starting over in their own land to follow her into the unknown? Then, halfway there, Naomi stopped, and with a choked voice, she said, "Go back, my daughters. Go back to your mother's homes. May the Lord be kind to you as you have been to me and my sons who have already left. May he grant you security in a new home with new husbands." She kissed them, and they all wept, loudly, strongly. With the pain of those who know that there are farewells that tear the soul apart, imagine the scene. 3 women in the middle of a dusty road, the scorching sun, the hot wind carrying the sand. Naomi, bent under the weight of life, trying to free those young women from a hopeless fate. Orpah, torn between love and reason, looking back toward Moab, to what could still be. And Ruth, staring intently at Naomi, as if she saw something no one else could. Orpah gave in. She kissed her mother-in-law and went back. But Ruth stayed, and when Naomi insisted, "Look, Your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go back with her." That's when Ruth uttered the words that would echo for eternity. "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." This wasn't just loyalty, it was total surrender. It was blind faith. It was the choice to abandon everything, identity, security, future, for love of someone who had nothing to offer except an unknown God. And it was on that road, in that moment of absolute renunciation, that Ruth's destiny began to be sealed. She didn't know it, but she was walking straight to the heart of a plan much bigger than herself. Ruth was a Moabite. Let that sink in for a moment. Moab was descended from an incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter. The Moabites worshipped the god Chemosh, known for brutal sacrifices. Israel and Moab had a history of conflict, mistrust, and separation. A Moabite woman in Israel was not welcome. She was tolerated at best, despised at worst. And yet, Ruth chose to go. She had no guarantees, no promises. She didn't even have the assurance of being accepted. What she did have was a deep conviction that Naomi's God was real, and that it was worth risking everything for him. Think about the weight of that decision. Ruth gave up the comfort of family. She gave up potential suitors in her own culture. She gave up the religion she had known since childhood. She burned her bridges. There was no plan B. There was no turning back. It was all or nothing. And do you know what this reveals? That true faith doesn't wait for ideal conditions. It acts even when everything says otherwise. Ruth didn't see signs in the sky. She didn't receive any prophecy. She simply loved, trusted, and followed. And God honors that kind of faith. Naomi realized that Ruth was determined. There were no more arguments. So the two went together, one bitter, aged, and disillusioned, the other young, a foreigner, and full of an inexplicable hope. Two widows walking towards the unknown, one carrying the pain of the past, the other carrying the seed of the future. When they finally arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city was abuzz. "Isn't that Naomi?" the women asked. But Naomi replied bitterly, "Do not call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, for the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." She saw only loss, but God saw redemption about to blossom. And while Naomi mourned, Ruth remained silently by her side, faithful, determined, prepared for what was to come. Ruth's faithfulness did not change the circumstances immediately, but she planted a seed that God was about to water. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, although at that moment no one knew it yet. Naomi and Ruth had nothing, no land, no men to provide for them, no resources. They were among the most vulnerable in society, poor widows. But the law of Moses provided something for people like them. During the harvest, landowners were to leave the ears of grain at the edges of the fields and what fell to the ground, so that the poor, widows and foreigners could glean, that is, collect the leftovers. It was a form of divine provision embedded in the very social fabric of Israel. Ruth knew her position. She was the youngest, the strongest. Naomi was tired, broken. So Ruth took the initiative. "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, after someone who will let me," she said, and Naomi agreed. Now, pay attention to this seemingly simple yet profoundly significant detail. The biblical text says that Ruth, by chance, ended up in the field of a man named Boaz, who was a relative of Elimelech. By chance? There is no such thing as chance in God's plans. What seems like coincidence is, in fact, divine providence orchestrating every detail. Ruth didn't know whose field it was. She simply went. She bent down and she began to work, under the scorching sun, among strangers who looked at her with suspicion, a Moabite foreigner gleaning leftovers from the harvest. Humble, determined, willing to do whatever was necessary to support her mother-in-law. Oh, and before I forget, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any Bible stories that can transform your life. And leave a like so more people can learn about God's restorative love. While Ruth was working, something was about to happen. Someone was about to arrive in the field. And this encounter would change everything, because God wasn't just providing bread for that day. He was planting seeds for a future that would transcend generations. Boaz was a man of prestige, rich, respected, influential. The kind of man who, when he arrived in the field, everyone noticed. And that's exactly what happened that day. He arrived and greeted his workers. "The Lord be with you," they replied. "The Lord bless you." There was a culture of faith there. It wasn't just business, it was fellowship. Then Boaz looked around and saw a different woman among the workers, someone he didn't recognize. He asked the foreman, "Whose young woman is that?" The answer came quickly. "She is the Moabite woman who returned from Moab with Naomi. She asked permission to glean behind the reapers. She came into the field this morning and has been working without stopping, except for a brief pause." Two things caught Boaz's attention. First, her origin. She was the Moabite woman who had accompanied Naomi. Second, her character. She worked tirelessly. She wasn't there to lazily take advantage of others' generosity. She was there with dignity, sweat, and effort. And it was at that moment that Boaz did something unexpected. He approached Ruth and said, "Listen, my daughter, don't go gleaning in another field. Stay here with my servants. Watch where the men are gleaning and follow behind the young women. I have instructed the young men not to touch you. And when you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from the water that the servants have drawn." Wait, did you realize what just happened? Boaz had just offered protection, provision, and inclusion to a foreigner. In the society where Moabite women were looked down upon, where single women were vulnerable, where foreigners were marginalized, Boaz saw something different. He saw a woman of character, of loyalty, of faith. Ruth bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked, "Why are you being so kind to me, to notice me, since I am a foreigner?" Her humility was genuine. She expected nothing. She demanded nothing. She simply accepted the grace with gratitude. And Boaz responded with words that revealed something deeper. "I have been told all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of her husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland to live with a people you did not know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." He knew her story, and he admired Ruth's courage, faith, and sacrifice. At that moment, something began to stir. It wasn't just compassion. It was respect. It was recognition. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet fully understood. But God already knew, and he was guiding every step. Boaz didn't stop there. He went above and beyond. During lunch, he called Ruth over. "Come here, eat some of the bread and dip your piece in the vinegar." She sat down with the reapers, not as a stranger among the leftovers, but as someone honored at the table. Boaz even served her roasted grain, and Ruth ate until she was satisfied. There was even some left over. When she got up to go back to work, Boaz instructed his servants, "Even if she gleans among the sheaves, do not shame her. Instead, take some ears of grain from the sheaves and drop them for her on purpose. Do not rebuke her." Do you understand what this means? Boaz was intentionally making Ruth's work easier. He didn't humiliate her with obvious charity. He honored her dignity by allowing her to continue working, but ensuring her effort was abundantly rewarded. That is wisdom. That is genuine kindness. Ruth worked all day. When she threshed what she had harvested, she had about an ephah of barley, approximately 22 liters. This was not leftover. It was a generous provision. She carried it all back to Naomi. When Naomi saw the amount, She was surprised. "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the one who helped you." Ruth told her everything, and when she mentioned the name Boaz, something changed in Naomi's face. For the first time since returning to Bethlehem, a spark of hope shone in her eyes. "Blessed be he by the Lord," said Naomi, "who has not forsaken his kindness to the living or to the dead." And then she revealed something crucial. "This man is our close relative. He is one of our redeemers." Redeemer. In Hebrew, Goel, a close relative who, by law, had the right and responsibility to redeem lost property, pay debts, or even marry the widow of a deceased relative to preserve the family name. Boaz was that, a potential redeemer. Naomi began to see not just provision, but redemption, not just bread, but a future. And she instructed Ruth to continue working in Boaz's field, where she would be safe. Ruth obeyed. And throughout the barley and wheat harvest, she remained there, working, growing in favor, building a reputation. Meanwhile, Boaz watched. He saw her faithfulness, her integrity, her devotion to Naomi, and something grew within him as well. Respect turned into admiration, admiration into affection. But there was still one unresolved issue, a decision that needed to be made, a risk that someone would have to take. And Naomi knew exactly what to do. Before we move on to the most tense moment in this story, you need to understand something fundamental, the concept of the kinsman redeemer, because without it, you won't grasp the depth of what's about to happen. In the law of Moses, God established a beautiful and profound provision to protect the vulnerable. If a man died without children, a close relative, called Goel the heir or redeemer, had the right and duty to marry the widow. The first child of this marriage would bear the name of the deceased, ensuring that his legacy and memory would not be erased. Furthermore, the redeemer could buy back lands that the family had lost due to poverty or debt. He restored what had been lost. He paid the price. He assumed responsibility. It was an act of literal redemption. Now, consider what this meant for Ruth and Naomi. Elimelech had left land in Bethlehem. Naomi, as a widow, had no way to reclaim it on her own. And Ruth, as the widow of Elimelech's son, was tied to that inheritance. But she was a foreigner, voiceless, powerless. They needed a redeemer, someone willing to pay the price, take responsibility, and restore what was lost. Boaz was a close relative, but he wasn't the closest. There was another man with legal rights before him, and according to the law, that other man had priority. But here's the question. Would this man be willing? Would he pay the price? Would he make the commitment not only to the land, but to the foreign widow who came with it? Naomi knew it was time to act. The harvest was ending. Boaz had shown kindness, but had made no move toward marriage. Perhaps because of the other relative, perhaps out of respect for social standing, perhaps because he didn't want to put pressure on Ruth. But Naomi wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. She had a plan. Bold, risky, culturally acceptable, but emotionally intense. And Ruth would need all the courage she possessed to carry it out, because what was about to happen would test not only Boaz's intentions, but Ruth's heart, and it would determine the future of both of them. Naomi said to Ruth, "Wash yourself, put on perfume, and dress in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Observe where he lies down, then uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do." That was the plan. And Ruth, without questioning, replied, "I will do everything you say." Consider what was being asked here. Ruth was to go alone, at night, to the threshing floor, where Boaz would be sleeping after celebrating the end of the harvest. She was to approach him secretly, uncover his feet, and lie down there. In the culture of that time, uncovering someone's feet and lying at their feet was a gesture of submission, but also a request for protection and marriage. It was bold. It was vulnerable. What if Boaz rejected her? What if he misinterpreted her? What if someone saw them and her reputation was ruined? But Ruth went. She waited for Boaz to eat, drink, and lie down satisfied near the pile of grain. Then quietly, She approached, she uncovered his feet, and she lay down there. In the middle of the night, something woke Boaz. He turned around and was surprised to see a woman at his feet. Startled, he asked, "Who are you?" And she replied, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread the corner of your cloak over me, for you are a redeemer." She was asking for protection, marriage, redemption. She was placing her future in his hands. Boaz could have reacted in many ways. He could have been offended. He could have felt she was being inappropriate. But no, he was deeply touched. "Blessed are you by the Lord, my daughter," he said. "This act of kindness of yours is even greater than the first, for you did not go after the young men, whether poor or rich." Did you understand? Boaz was saying that Ruth could have chosen younger, more attractive men, more within her age range, but she chose him, an older, respected man who represented stability, redemption, and honor. "Now, my daughter, do not be afraid," Boaz continued. "I will do for you all that you ask. Everyone in the city knows that you are a virtuous woman." Boaz recognized her character, her faith, her integrity, and he wanted to honor her. But then came the complication. "Although it is true that I am a redeemer, there is another relative closer than I. Stay here tonight. In the morning, if he wants to redeem you, let him. But if he does not want to, as surely as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down here until morning." Ruth stayed at his feet until almost dawn. Before there was enough light for anyone to recognize her, Boaz woke her and said, "No one should know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He filled her cloak with 6 measures of barley, a generous gift, and she went home. Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Ruth told her everything, and Naomi, wise as always, said, "Wait, my daughter, until we know what happens, for this man will not rest until he settles the matter today." Now everything depended on Boaz and on the other relative. Redemption was just a step away, or rejection. The next morning, Boaz went to the city gate, the place where legal matters were settled, where the elders gathered, where public decisions were made. He sat and waited, and soon that closest relative passed by. "Come here, my friend, sit down," Boaz said. The man sat down. Boaz gathered 10 elders as witnesses. Then he began, "Naomi, who has returned from Moab, is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should give you the opportunity to buy it in the presence of these elders. If you want to redeem it, redeem it. But if you don't want to, tell me, so that I may know. For no one has this right besides you, and I come after you." The man replied quickly, "I will rescue her." Boaz then added the crucial detail. "On the day you buy Naomi's land, you will also be acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the deceased, in order to keep the name of the dead man on your property." Silence. The man hesitated. Then he said, "In that case I cannot redeem it, for I might jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." He was willing to buy the land, but not to take responsibility for the foreign widow. He saw the cost and backed down. But Boaz was ready. He stood before the elders and declared publicly, "Today you are witnesses that I am acquiring from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead man on his property." The elders and all the people who were at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is entering your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the nation of Israel. May you prosper in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem." Boaz and Ruth got married. And for the first time in history, we see something extraordinary. A man from Israel publicly, legally, lovingly choosing a foreign woman. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but in recognition of her worth, her faith, her character. Ruth, the rejected Moabite, became Ruth, the honored wife. Ruth, the widow without a future, became Ruth, the restored woman. Ruth, the invisible foreigner, became Ruth, the blessed woman. And God didn't stop there. Ruth became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. The women of Bethlehem said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer this day. May he become famous throughout Israel. May he renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has borne you this boy." Naomi, who had returned bitter and empty, now held a grandson in her arms. She, who thought God had abandoned her, now saw his faithfulness manifested. The boy was named Obed, and Obed would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, King David, the greatest king of Israel, the man after God's own heart. And it all began with a Moabite woman who chose to trust, and a man who chose to redeem. Now we come to the point I promised to reveal from the beginning. The story of Ruth and Boaz doesn't end with a happy marriage. It spans generations, centuries, until it reaches you today. Because Ruth didn't just enter the lineage of David, she entered the lineage of the Messiah, of the Savior, of Jesus Christ. When you open the Gospel of Matthew in the 1st chapter, you find the genealogy of Jesus. And there, among the names of the patriarchs, is her Ruth the Moabite, one of the few women mentioned, and not just mentioned, honored, included in the plan of redemption for humanity. God took a foreigner, a widow, a woman without rights, without position, without hope, and placed her in the lineage of the Savior of the world. This is not a coincidence. This is purpose, because Ruth's message is this: it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what you've lost. It doesn't matter how many times you've been rejected, ignored, or deemed insufficient. When you choose to trust in God, when you place yourself under His wings, when you walk in faith even without seeing the future, God writes a story that surpasses anything you could imagine. Ruth was a shadow, a prefiguration. It pointed to something greater, to all of us who were strangers, separated from God, without hope. And then came the true kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ. He paid the price we could not pay. He assumed the debt we could not assume. He redeemed us from death, from sin, from condemnation. Boaz redeemed Ruth according to the law. Jesus redeems us by grace. And just as Ruth needed to humble herself, to draw near, to surrender at the feet of Boaz and say, "I need you," we too need to humble ourselves before Christ and say, "I cannot save myself. I need a Savior." This is the story within the story, the gospel hidden in the Old Testament. The love that sprang from the ashes of Ruth and Boaz was only a foreshadowing of the love that would spring from the ashes of Calvary, where Jesus died so that we might live. So, what does this story mean to you today? Perhaps you're like Naomi, thinking that God has abandoned you, that your life is over, that there's no hope left. But remember, God doesn't write endings where you see periods. He is working, even when you don't see it. Perhaps you are like Ruth, feeling like a stranger out of place, not belonging anywhere. But know this: when you choose the true God, you are no longer a stranger. You are a child. You are an heir. You have a place in God's family. Or perhaps you need to be like Boaz, someone who sees beyond appearances, who extends mercy, who acts as a redeemer in someone's life. The story of Ruth and Boaz teaches us that God's restorative love can transform any situation. That faithfulness is rewarded, that redemption is real, and that God uses the brokenhearted to fulfill His eternal purposes. If this story touched you, leave a comment telling us what impacted your heart the most. Subscribe to the channel for more Bible stories that will strengthen your faith. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. And share it with someone who needs to hear that God is the God of redemption, of new beginnings, of hope. Remember, it doesn't matter where you are now. It doesn't matter what you've lost. It doesn't matter how many times you've failed. God can write a beautiful story with the ashes of your life, because He is an expert at transforming pain into purpose, loss into legacy, and ashes into beauty. May the story of Ruth and Boaz be a constant reminder that God's love never gives up on you. and that the true kinsman redeemer Jesus Christ has already paid the price for your redemption. All you have to do is say yes,